Now we start with today's huge news from Scotland. The First Minister, Humza Yousaf, is facing a vote of no confidence after the SNP's coalition with the Greens spectacularly collapsed. Mr Yousaf is now leading a minority government, and here's how the First Minister broke the news this morning.
The Butte House Agreement was intended to provide stability to the Scottish Government, and it has made possible a number of achievements. But it has served its purpose. I believe that going forward, it is in the best interests of the people of Scotland to pursue a different arrangement. That is why, following a discussion with my Cabinet this morning, I have formally notified Patrick Harvie and Lorna Slater that I am terminating the Butte House Agreement with immediate effect.
Well, let's speak now to GB News' Scotland reporter Tony Maguire, who's at Hollyrood. Tony, welcome to the show. The sun is shining on you there in Edinburgh, but the storm clouds are gathering for the First Minister.
Oh boy, I think by this point Humza Yousaf should be used to what his Twitter timeline looks when he wakes up in the morning. But I don't think anybody could, even he could have expected this day went the way it has. Now, obviously, he met with his cabinet early this morning and they agreed to end the Butte House Agreement. That would leave the Scottish National Party with a minority government. But then he goes into First Minister's questions, as he does every Thursday, and Douglas Ross, leader of the Scottish Conservatives, well, he threw down the gauntlet to the other opposition parties and declared his intention to initiate a vote of no confidence. Now, within about an hour or two of that, we saw Anas Sarwar, leader of Scottish Labour, put out a tweet using the precise words, "Scottish Labour has no confidence in Humza Yousaf and the SNP government." Now, if we look a little bit at the numbers here, 129 MSPs, 63 of them are SNP. Now, if we combine the MSPs from Scottish Conservatives, Labour, Lib Dems, then that brings us round about just below the number the SNP have. So a lot of attention is currently being given on the Greens, but many people think that actually the Green Party, well, they have to vote with the Scottish Conservatives to save any kind of face. And that means Ash Regan, Scotland's only, Alba's only MSP and effectively leader of Alba Party in Hollyrood, with all of the power. Now, just to remind you, Ash Regan, she left the government, not the SNP, just the government during the consultation period of the Gender Recognition Reform Bill, and subsequently was called the member, not by her name, the member, until she left the party. She has since obviously joined Alba, and she will be having quite a lot of discussions, I imagine, this evening to see where this goes. So we know that the political parties don't have any faith, apparently, in Humza Yousaf, but do the members of the public? Well, I went out today and I spoke to members of the public in Edinburgh and asked them, do they still have confidence in this government?
I think it's a good thing for Scotland. I think the Greens have not been a force for good in our country, so frankly I think yes, I'm glad to see the Butte House Agreement come to an end.
And you think the SNP will still be okay with a minority government?
Well, I think it'll put them under a bit of pressure. We'll see.
I'd heard rumours and things are going on, but I didn't actually know that's happened today, so not as confident.
Not particularly. I think we're in a mess at the moment.
Do you think that's been going on for a while? Do you think would you like to see an election?
Probably.
I think they might have to call an election, yeah, but that's a sad event.
No, I haven't been for a long time actually, but I didn't really see the news this morning.
So the Greens have left the SNP a minority government now.
Yeah.
So am I right in saying you might fancy an election? Would that clear things up?
Yes, I think we should, yes.
Now, we know that Humza Yousaf has survived some pretty sticky situations already in the last 13 months or so. But, you know, I would pay anything to be a fly in the wall of Butte House tonight, or indeed even Ash Regan's home, to wonder about what these conversations are as we approach this vote of no confidence. But certainly on paper, it doesn't look like the landslide that Humza Yousaf would be hoping for. It's going to be tight.
OK, Tony Maguire, live in Hollywood. Thank you for that update. Well, I'm joined now by freelance columnist Alistair Stewart. Alistair, welcome to the show. It's been a torrid year for the First Minister, and somehow it's just got worse. He's been accused of weakness today, but he said quite the opposite. This shows leadership. What's your take?
No, I think it is very much blown up in his face, and the Greens are being used as a scapegoat for Mr. Yousaf. If you look back on the timeline of this, the Greens have called, or were about to call, an emergency meeting. They were going to consider whether or not they themselves wanted to remain in the Scottish Government, given that the Scottish Government had failed to meet its own targets in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. They had significantly moved away from that. They themselves were going to decide, and very likely going to decide, that they were going to leave. Mr. Yousaf's move has been to push them before they jumped. Now, that's backfired significantly, as the vote of no confidence in Mr. Yousaf suggests. It's now clearly demonstrating that Mr. Yousaf has lost control of the situation, and that the Greens are being used by the SNP or senior members of the SNP as an excuse for their own failures. There's an irony in this situation in that the Greens were brought into government in 2021 to point out and say that we have a majority to push ahead with an independent strategy. This is how we're going to achieve it. This is our pro-independence majority at Hollyrood. The irony is that they've spent these years focusing on policies that they disagree with, such as the Gender Recognition and Reform Bill, rather than proposals and plans for independence. So in many ways, they've fallen out over domestic policy, which the SNP should have been focusing on in the first place over the last 17 years.
And Alistair, the next official Hollyrood election is not due to take place until May 2026. We're seeing this no confidence motion go in. Do you think it has any chance of passing, considering the metrics and the bitter irony, of course, of Ash Regan being a central player? Of course, she was involved in that SNP leadership challenge and disagrees with Mr. Yousaf, certainly on the gender recognition topic. Is there a chance of this going ahead, or do you think Mr. Yousaf will simply batten down the hatches and beetle his brow and carry on as usual?
Mr. Yousaf has shown himself very adept at surviving sticky situations, certainly that surrounding his predecessor. If you had asked me 3, maybe even 6 months ago, I would have said this is a flirtation. It's extremely unlikely. But if you look at the convergence of circumstance, the Greens are going to be obligated to vote, very strangely, with the Scottish Conservatives, who have brought this vote of no confidence. There is Ash Regan, as you pointed out, but there's also a great deal of dissent in the backbenches of the SNP itself. Big party beasts like Fergus Ewing, who had his membership suspended, Kate Forbes, who was a previous leadership front-runner. There is a great deal of dissent there. Now, I'm not trying to caveat my words, but I do think that Mr. Yousaf is in an extremely sticky situation, and a lot of this started at 8 a.m. this morning. I think he thought he was on the front foot. He's clearly not, and the whole move with the Greens has shown his position to be much more vulnerable than maybe even he realises.
And Alistair, already the prospect of a second referendum of Scottish independence seemed to be a withering dream. Now it must seem like an absolute galaxy away. Any chance of moving towards a second referendum, as the SNP seemingly is lying in tatters?
I think it's astonishingly unlikely now. And Mr. Yousaf, ironically, there's a lot of irony going around, has moved his party further away from that. He chose his words very carefully this morning, and by ejecting the Greens from his own government, he said that he's prepared to work with opposition parties. In many ways, this is deeply reminiscent of 2007 under Alex Salmond's leadership, who worked on a case-by-case basis with opposition parties. Those are not the words, and that's not the move of someone who's convinced that Scottish independence is a vehicle that's going to appear anytime soon, and certainly not a material likely. He's got bigger fish to fry at the moment, and they are very significant problems facing him and his administration before you even get to independence. OK, dark days ahead, it looks like, for Humza Yousaf. Thank you for joining us, Alistair Stewart.